this is more of a topical reflection, if you will. And the title, and I want this to sort of set the theme for the rest of the weekend, is a defense, or in defense rather. The title is In Defense of Tradition. In Defense of Tradition. And I think this relates to music because music was one of the first things to go, at least traditional music, in the last few decades that I can think of. I mean, you think there's so many other things. Churches don't tend to want graveyards or steeples. Even crosses are considered somewhat archaic. I've done some documentaries on church takeovers. Some of you might have seen them. And you bring these consulting firms in, and they don't think you should have a choir. They don't think you should have formal attire. I was doing an interview yesterday with a radio host, and I forget the name of the show. But the host was asking about church mergers, and he said, well, can any of them go well, though? I mean, are there examples of church mergers working out? I said, I'm sure there are, but I will say this. I've never heard of a church merger where the traditional church takes over the contemporary church and says, you know what, that rock band, you better get rid of that. And you better start dressing formally. And I want to see crosses and organs. I mean, it always goes the other way. Every single time, the pressure is on those with traditional beliefs and I would say the trappings of traditional church. They're the ones that have to conform to whatever the new thing is. Every time. And why is that, right? Why is that? Well, obviously there's a zeitgeist. There's an anti-traditional mindset that has taken over the world we live in. We were born into that. Every person, I don't care how old you are, you were born into that if you're here. You were just born at a point maybe where there was still more tradition if you're a little older. And the older you get, the less and less and less of it you see around you. So I want to sort of examine this pathology or this phenomenon, this anti-traditional thinking, and then I want to give you a defense of tradition, why I think tradition is actually kind of important. And we don't have to fall into the trap of being the kind of people who just hold fast to traditions that they don't understand anymore. That's not a right mentality. But there's a reason that traditions have grown up in the first place, right? There's reasons behind these things. And I think there's an attitude of humility we need even in approaching this, because we have to recognize we're born into a world we didn't create. Not only did God create the world we live in, but we're also standing on the shoulders. We're just a link in a chain that goes back so far we can't see it. And many of the things that we are accustomed to were decided long before we ever came into existence. It's the water we swim in. I mean, I don't know if you all speak English, right? I mean, did you intentionally think of all the languages, this is the best one, or did you just learn whatever you were born into, right? Traditions are like that. So I want to talk about, I'm going to do this sort of backwards in a way. Like instead of talking about tradition first, I'm going to talk about ideology first, so we can sort of step outside the box and examine that as objectively as possible. And for the last, 2-3 centuries, especially the last century, I think it's fair to say we live in what philosophers and historians call modernity. And in modernity, we've had a revolving set of ideologies in search for stability and purpose. And really, what we've been living in is a society attempting to find universal answers without religion, without Christianity, without God. These are the ways that our forefathers would have found meaning and purpose. But because we've thrown that out, we have to come up with some other way that unites everyone together, that we can all share a society together, even with different values and so forth, but have enough in common that it works. So we have these revolving ideologies. And I would say mostly these ideologies are political in nature. I think that's the modern dilemma. We have a world of political ideology substituting for religion, essentially. Everything's political, right? So I want to give you a definition of ideology, so we're clear on this. I'm going to expand on this because I think it's a hard concept to grasp. But once you grasp it, you see it everywhere. You get it. This is a definition from Sir Roger Scruton's Political Dictionary. He says, ideology is any systematic and all-embracing political doctrine which claims to give a complete and universally applicable theory of man and society and to derive therefrom a program of political action. I'll read that one more time. Any systematic and all-embracing political doctrine which claims to give a complete and universally applicable theory of man and society and to derive therefrom a program of political action. That's what he says an ideology is from a political angle. Here's another definition for you. This is from my advisor in grad school, Kerry Roberts. He's a historian. He describes ideology as a rationalistic, closed system of thought designed to explain all of human behavior through simple precepts. I'll give you a few examples of that. Ideology explains human nature and activity in total by reducing it to a singular impulse. So what's that impulse? For Marxists, it's class conflict. Every single thing someone does is related to a conflict they have with another class. They're a member of a certain group. There's another group that they're in conflict with, and so that's why they do everything they do. That's what makes the world go around. For a feminist, it is patriarchal domination, right? Everything comes back down to the patriarchy and what the patriarchy is trying to do to everyone. For critical race theorists, it is whiteness. And this is going back to Hitler and even before that. For anti-Semitic ideology, it's Jewish power. And basically, what happens in each of these ideologies, and there's many more, you have a substitute for good and evil. Instead of what Jesus said, you find it internally. It's within man because of his Adamic nature. Sin is out there somewhere, and we can take care of it by getting rid of this group of people or that group of people, and so you vilify certain people groups. And this is basically the story of the 20th century and coming into the 21st century. And when one ideology fails, we just substitute it for another one, right? And oftentimes they're so similar. In fact, there was a book I was reading by a guy named Legutko, who was in an Eastern Bloc country. And when the Soviet Union fell, he made an observation. He said, it didn't seem like there were some changes, but it didn't seem like these changes were super fundamental. The liberal democracy and the communism he lived under were actually really similar in many ways. And he said the same groups of people were in control in each one. And it's an amazing book. It's called The Demon in Democracy. I think he's a traditional Catholic, but it's worth the read. And really what he was examining, he was saying they're both ideological. They're both opposed to tradition, right? They don't want religion. They want a humanistic system that is set up to provide eventually, if all things go well, a utopia state of some kind. And we'll get there through human action. We're going to save ourselves. So in each case, I think this is the important thing to get to wrap your head around. In each case, reality is basically compressed into some kind of essential nature. Everything is this one thing. It's just ones and zeros, and then you develop kind of a tunnel vision where it blinds you to things. You can't see things that don't fit into your particular preconceived philosophical notion. So that's the first thing about ideology I would emphasize. It is totalizing. Every activity in life falls within this ultimate structure. Secondly, another thing to observe about ideology, it is based upon often innovative abstractions. It's based upon often innovative abstractions. This is a quote from Richard Weaver in his essay, Up from Liberalism, where he talks about going through a conversion from being a Marxist, essentially, to being a conservative and propitiating tradition. He says this, the intent of the radical is to defy all substance, meaning the particulars, the world as it is to defy that world, the true world that we live in, or to press it into forms conceived in his mind alone. So in other words, you have a concept in your mind, you have an abstraction, and then you overlay reality with that abstraction, and everything must fit into that abstraction. It's like putting on those glasses, you used to have those yellow glasses, you could see at night, everything looks different. That's like an ideology. You put it on, and everything in reality looks a little different through this lens that you're looking at. Number 3, ideology demands revolutionary action. Russell Kirk said this, the ideologue thinks of politics as a revolutionary instrument for transforming society and even transforming human nature. In his march toward utopia, the ideologue is merciless. That's where you get things like a Holocaust. That's where you get Holodomor. That's where you get the killing fields. That's, all we could just go on and on about all these atrocities. How did all these things happen? Well, they were willing to sacrifice however many people were necessary and however much pain it caused to reach their ideal, their utopia that they've come up with in their math, and now they are going to be in the lab and they're going to make it work. Well, it doesn't work, and all it brings is death and destruction, and that's the story of the 20th century, but we haven't escaped it. We just vacillate to another ideology that we think is going to save us. A good analogy, I was just thinking about this the other day because my daughter, who's 15 months old, she was playing with one of those cubes that has different shapes. You know what I'm talking about? The triangle won't fit into the star. And so it teaches kids shapes. Well, I think that's a good analogy for what an ideologue tries to do in a way, right? They find one thing, and maybe has a ring of truth to it somewhere, that, I guess there is, you could have abusive patriarchal forms of governance and so forth. That can happen. I've seen people abuse their power and authority, right? And so that's your circle. And then you try to fit that through every single situation that comes up. And it doesn't fit, but you make it fit because that's your ideology. So that's a little analogy that I thought might explain kind of how this works. It is kind of the Romans 1 worshiping the creation. You're reducing everything to this one thing and then making that the ultimate. I think there's a parallel in Scripture with idolatry. Now, obviously, Scripture is written at a time when mankind, even if they're not believers in the true God, they're religious. But in idolatry, you also see it requires sacrifice, it promises paradise, it's built on lies or half-truths, and it blinds the followers. In Isaiah 44:20, it says, "The idol maker feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver himself, nor say, 'Is there not a lie in my right hand?'" So, ideology, to summarize some of this, is an abstract system of thought that substitutes for religion, and it is very anti-tradition. You can't have traditional societies exist with ideological societies. Ideologues will take tradition out because what tradition does is it tells you have commitments to the past, to the people around you. You have attachments that are not derived from the mind, but that are derived from the nature that God has set up. So what does this mean for tradition and for the church and music and everything we're going to talk about this week? Well, in the church, what I think's happened in Christianity and in neo-evangelicalism in particular is there's been an attempt to reconcile Christianity to modern ideologies. Whatever the new ideology is that everyone's saying that's the thing that we should all get behind, there's a group of Christian leaders ready to say, and Christianity will be right there with you and try to kind of absorb some of the popularity from this rush towards this new movement. And one of the casualties has been traditional music, I think, in all of this, right? So some examples. Liberalism and its derivatives, I think that's the main one that the modern church has bought into, is a liberalism. Its derivatives in psychology and youth culture and individualism, which reduces meaning to just mere taste. There's no rules for music or art. It's just your tastes, right? The church has just kind of gone along with this. And, social justice, we saw this, and its derivatives in feminist, Marxist, and anti-racism. The church has gone along with that and then tried to say, well, we're going to diversify our elder board and our books and our library. I do see, not in mainstream or institutional circles, but I do see a rising tide of an anti-Semitic ideology, which I'm looking at this and I'm saying it's initial phases, but it could wind up in a very similar place because it has the same basic structure. Now, no one misquote me. I didn't say there was a woke right because I don't think there's a woke right because wokeness is egalitarian and this is hierarchical. But I do think that we have a tendency to just jump into whatever the next movement is, and it's ideologically driven when it's coming from the broader world. So what are some of the casualties, especially of the liberal kind of instinct? Well, traditional hymns are one of the first. I'm mindful of the fact that the worship wars were more than 20 years ago now. And they ended about 20 years ago. Like we don't even talk about this anymore, right? Is that even a controversy or discussion? I think what happened is the modernists or the liberals, they might not have known they were being liberal, but they won. They won. And there's still some churches hanging on, but by and large, the traditional music is gone. I grew up learning hymns, and my dad's generation would have been more, that's what they had, that's what they knew. But I'm realizing now as a minister of music at my own church, which is a pretty traditional church, people come for the expository preaching. The people coming in don't know hymns at all. So we've actually had a program, for lack of a better term, we have a hymn of the month. Every month, this is the hymn. We're going to be doing this every Sunday till you learn it, and then we'll start on a next hymn. So to people to relearn the songbook of our rich Christian past, because it's forgotten at this point. But like I said, there's other things I meant, like graveyards. That's not even a thought now when you construct a church building. Well, why would you want a graveyard? That reminds people of, I don't know, death. That would kind of be a bummer, going into church all happy, right? Death. Formal attire, right? I'm not saying it's wrong to necessarily be informal. It depends on the circumstance. We're at a camp right now, right? It's pretty informal. But, I mean, it's changed. I saw videos of the church that I attend now from the 90s, and every woman had a dress on. Every guy had a sport jacket on and a tie. I'm like, wow, what happened? Like 20 years. I mean, someone from another era might look at that and say, did you guys lose a war? Like, what happened to, your culture? You used to look so nice, and now, what happened? And we're a little more formal than I think a lot of churches, but as I've traveled, I've seen some interesting things. I'll put it that way. Yeah, and that's just, we could go on and on with all the different changes, and not every change is bad, right? But the evening service, the Wednesday night service, those are gone now. There's a lot of traditional things that we've had that are leaving, some of them for different reasons, but I can't help but think behind a lot of this is an intentional strategy to get us away from those things, because there's a perception they're holding us back, that we need to go to places where the world's going to resonate with us, and if we hold on to traditions, they won't resonate with us. That's old white guy stuff, right? That's not, this is the kind of thing I heard in seminary. The young people don't like that. We need to reach them where they're at, right? Well, that's based on their taste. That's just looking at the taste of people and saying we should conform to your personal taste. That's a liberal instinct. Now, the conservative reaction to this has, by and large, been this. As long as it's not doctrinal, then it's fine, okay? Because I've run into this quite a bit. I just did a documentary. This is a great example. I just did a documentary on this church, Faith Baptist Nightdale in North Carolina. Some of you have seen that. And if you've watched the documentary, you'll know they got rid of the choir. They got rid of the Sunday schools. They got rid of the youth center. They got rid of the preschool. It's just like every legacy ministry they targeted. Take the flags out. The reason given in these cases when members would ask was, it might offend people. We don't want people to feel uncomfortable by having to listen to a choir, right, and sing traditional hymns. We want to reach people where they're at. So everything got dumbed down. Everything got casual. And everything also, ironically, got more controlled from the people at the top. They were able to sort of get rid of the folks who would challenge them if they tried to keep changing things. And one of the reactions was, look, none of that's doctrinal. I saw the comments on YouTube. None of that's doctrinal. They weren't changing the deity of Christ or the Trinity. They weren't changing the gospel. We were upset about a choir. Where's your priorities? That just shows where your priorities are in the wrong place. You should be about the gospel, not about whether or not a church has a choir or hymns or crosses or all the rest. And I thought that was an interesting reaction. I've heard that before, that as long as the doctrine is there, nothing else really matters. I don't actually think that's not true. I think doctrine is very important, but I don't think that's the only thing. In fact, I think a lot of these changes actually have doctrinal implications, and we've gotten rid of things that confer identity. We're lost now. We don't know who we are, because it's like going to your old home place, right? That house you grew up in, and everything, the coffee maker was there, and the bed was there, and they write it, and we just strip the whole thing and put up, drywall and pictures you'd see at a bank. Is it the same house? So it's not quite the same house, right? Those things actually matter. Aesthetics matters. Music matters. Art matters. Those things are actually very profound, and they affect us in very deep ways. So I remember the first time, my dad will remember this, this happened in the music wars at Grace Bible, I guess you could say the worship wars. There was a music guy who came, and he was sort of affable with the youth. And he was very casual. He's the kind of guy that would come with his keyboard and wear a t-shirt during the service. And it was, there was a sort of a moment where we were still doing some hymns, but we were bringing these praise choruses. And then he wanted to do this outreach thing, where they were going to bring in all this punk music. And it was a little weird. I'm not going to lie, the whole thing. I'm looking back, and it's one of those things that you're like, well, that'll age out real quick, that phase. Everyone thought it was cool at the time, and now you look back and you're like, oh man, look how he was dressed. Yeah. So anyway, the argument was, you got to reach people where they're at. This is where people are at. You got to get the youth, all of that. And I remember thinking at the time, well, you can't appeal to tradition, right? That's not an actual argument. Just because something's traditional doesn't mean you should keep doing it. And really what I've realized now, and what I'm going to bring to you, is actually the argument that this is against our tradition is actually a good argument. That's actually a very strong argument, way stronger than and I think because I was sort of buying into ideology in a way, like we have to reinvent the wheel. Maybe we should be humble, take a step back and realize we didn't create this place. And maybe some of the things that are around us are here for reasons that are beyond what we know. Chesterton's fence, let's really be careful before we move this. This might have ramifications we don't realize. So what is tradition? What is tradition? Why is that a good argument? I think there's two ways to look at tradition. There's a mechanistic way to look at tradition. And I think that's what most of us are probably accustomed to, right? Tradition is neutral and perhaps unnecessary. It's a tool, and there can be good or bad traditions according to an objective, rational, moral scale. So we can evaluate traditions, sometimes according to our own ideologies, and then figure out whether we should keep them or discard them. But essentially, tradition's just neutral, and maybe it's not even needed. Maybe it's not even needed. The etymology of the word is that which is handed down, transmitted, or inherited, right? So good tradition. Let's examine this for a minute, because there's some truth to this. Tradition is a mechanism. There's good tradition. 2 Thessalonians 2, chapter 2, verse 15. So then, brethren, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught, whether by word of mouth or by letter from us. So Paul says traditions are good, right? 1 Corinthians 11:2, he says something similar. He says, now I praise you because you remember in me everything and hold firmly to the traditions, just as I delivered them to you. Traditions require memory. You have to remember, right, to do them. And Paul's saying you should remember these things. You should keep doing them. It's a practice that you should not neglect. Well, there's also bad traditions, right? Because we have Mark 7, 8 through 9. Jesus says, neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. And he was also saying to them, you are experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. Same thing in Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. So there could be good tradition, there could be bad tradition. Tradition's just neutral, right? Well, not so fast. There's a modern kind of reductionist, I think, understanding of tradition that as worthless, and whatever good can come from it requires an unnecessary step that could easily be derived from science or ideology, right? So if we have to appeal to tradition, like we shouldn't even need to do that, because that's not going to tell us right or wrong. It doesn't direct us morally. We already have morality. Tradition's just, if you have it, great, but it's a quaint little thing. It's for Hallmark movies. I think sometimes we imbibe that and we approach the scripture with that. And yes, there is good and bad tradition. There is a mechanistic element. But I want to bring to you another way of thinking about tradition, which has been this is something I've been noodling on quite a bit. There's also a metaphysical element to tradition, right? It's not just a mechanism. It's not just like let's use some examples to make this clear. Let's say you had a dad that was into crime, and he handed down to you some knowledge of how to pull off some crimes. I see people nodding in the back. I don't know, maybe we could talk after. Yeah. So he teaches you how to you steal or whatever. It's a bad habit, or to drink, or I don't know. how many people drink because, well, dad drank, and then they become an alcoholic or whatever, right? This is a bad tradition, right? We understand that concept. There's also good traditions where, the father teaches the son carpentry or some skill. Now, examine this for a moment. Think about those examples. In itself, meaning ontologically, at the base of it, what defines tradition at a base level is actually good because it is a repository of wisdom. It reflects God's order, the good, the true, and the beautiful, and it binds culture together. Now let's go back to the example I just gave you. You have a father passing down practical knowledge. Now, a father can pass down negative qualities. In the words of the philosopher Hank Williams Jr., Hank, why do you drink? Why do you blow smoke? Why do you live out all those songs that you wrote? So it's a family tradition, right? Some of you know that song, some of you might not. Don't look it up. Not a good example. So Hank Jr. says, this is what Dad did, this is what I did, and I'm justified because Dad did it this way. All right, fair enough. But here's the thing about that. What's good about that? Think with me for a moment about this. What's good about Hank Jr.'s, hey, Dad did smoking and drinking, so I'm going to do smoking and drinking. Can we find anything good about that at all? I can find something good about it. You know what it is? He loves Dad. Now, he's not doing things, maybe the things he's doing from Dad, these are negative qualities. And here's the problem with it. Those negative qualities actually devalue the connection. Because if Dad's teaching you how to do bad stuff, guess who you're not going to for advice when you really need it? Dad, right? If you have a superficial relationship if that's the case. You can't trust all of Dad's advice. But you still have a connection to Dad based on activities. It might be fishing, right? So there's something about that on a base level that we know, even though there's a disorderedness in it, there's actually something good in the process of handing something down. Like that's something God wants us to do. It's a natural good that God's given us, even if a dad abuses that authority and hands down something he shouldn't. He gives his son a snake when he asks for a fish. That's a wrong, that's a misuse, but at a base level, the whole mechanism of tradition is actually a good thing. Now, think of a son who is learning carpentry from his dad, which is a skill. So my grandfather was a carpenter, so my dad learned a lot from him. I might have picked up a little bit. I was not paying attention as much as I probably should have. But I also learned a little bit of carpentry when I was a furniture repairman. Now, here's the thing about that. My dad learned carpentry from his dad. I learned most of what I know on the job as a furniture repairman. What's more special? You gain the same skills, let's say, but what's actually more special? Learning it from Dad, or learning it from a guy on YouTube, or learning it from someone else's dad, or learning it from your employer, learning it from Dad, right? You could learn the same set of skills. It could get you to the same location, but learning it from Dad there's something special about the relationship you're creating. There's something in the natural world God has created and it fosters a beautiful thing. That's tradition on a small level, passing down something good as it's intended, and building a relationship and a connection in the process. Okay, that's on a metaphysical level what tradition is. Now, how does tradition as intended differ from ideology? We talked about ideology. Well, it differs in three main ways: the source, the way it's propagated, and the loyalty it induces. So the source, we'll talk about that. In ideology is based on theoretical speculation. We ran the tests, we did the math, we figured out the idea, and your church needs to modernize in these ways. And the focus group told us, so we know it's true. We did a poll. We did scientific truth says your church needs to stop doing those hymns. I'm kid you not, that is how a lot of this goes down. That's how the consulting firm, the Unstuck group comes in, or Exano, or these firms make tons of money by going into churches and saying, you need to change this, that, and that wallpaper, and that. It's all wrong, modernize it. We did the study. And look at the results you're going to get. Well, in tradition works differently. These are theoretical speculations that come from someone's mind. Tradition is more external. It's not internal. It's not abstract in that sense. It's actually just the natural ordered and applied wisdom. It's the natural order and applied wisdom. People before you were living, and they had to live in the world God made, and they came up with ways of living in it which are kind of nice, which make life more worth living, that bring things like beauty to life and so forth, right? And this is handed down and expanded on and so forth. I'll give you an example. Genesis 2:24. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken from man." Natural order. God made it this way. It's a design. Tradition. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So now, for all time, from Adam forward, you know what man should do? Now, not all men do it, but he should leave his father and mother and then cleave to his wife. How come? Well, it's the way God designed the place. That's why. There's a tradition that's formed. And people who are growing up in the world tend to not question that. They're just born, when you love the girl, you get married. That's how it worked for a long time. That's just how it works. Why? That's the world God set up. And all our forefathers did it this way, right? Or they lived in societies that reinforced that. Here's another one. 2 Timothy 1:5. For I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm sure that it is within you as well. Now, you can have sincere faith without family members or mentors giving it to you, right? You can cultivate a relationship with God. He can talk to you. But there's something special, and Paul mentions it here, about grandmother Lois and mother Eunice. Man, Lois and Eunice, they get some credit in the Bible for Timothy and how he turned out. Well, that's tradition. They're passing down something good. So we have in our society, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we could go on forever about the customs alone that divide men and women and shape the way that they interact with each other. It used to be more fine-tuned than it is now, which is why there's a lot of confusion. But you get up when a woman enters the room, you open the door for a woman. You watch those old like Jane Austen movies. I mean, our wives do. We don't watch those. But if your wives watch an old Jane Austen movie, they have a dance. Everyone knows what to do. The protocol is there. Well, what is that? That's a tradition, but the tradition is there because there's a difference between men and women. It formed around a natural order distinction, and it may look different in different societies, but the point is it reinforces something that's true about the world. That's why it's there in the first place, right? So the source is different. You're not coming up with a theoretical speculation that we should do the Virginia Reel, and that'll get the young people to date and interact. No one came up with a focus group or a scientific, it was just, it grew out of changes over time, people knowing that there's differences between men and women, and it's good for a father or a man to leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife. All right, so how does it work? The second difference here. Ideology is top down, it's authoritarian. Tradition is bottom up, it's organic. Deuteronomy 6:4-7. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. And listen, you shall teach them diligently to your sons. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. That's tradition, right there. And what is it? Is it top down? Is it a forceful thing that comes? Now, there are traditions that are enforced that way, but if that's the only way your tradition's being enforced, it's not a tradition anymore. It's only a tradition when it's handed down. So when fathers teach their sons the truth about the Word of God, the truth about what God has done, and then they teach their sons, and they teach their sons, organically the society has a cohesion. God, that's how he set up Israel. Israel had stability and an identity. They knew who they were. They never asked themselves, they're never going on a journey trying to find themselves like so many people do, right? There was this rich guy, he was a CEO of a company I worked for, I remember, and he had a son that was like my age. I was in my 20s. And his son was so rich that he was able to pay for him to go to the jungles of New Zealand and live out in the woods for a while. And I'm like, like to find himself and to really, and I'm just like, what? It's cost a lot of money, obviously, to go to New Zealand. We have plenty of woods here. Look outside. But he wanted to do it in New Zealand. Like the children of Israel don't have that problem they knew who they were. Their fathers told them when they were little, right? Here's another one. Those 12 stones, which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. He goes through the whole story of them crossing over what God has done. Well, what is that? That's a monument. That's a tradition that's being passed down. That's a story that's being remembered. That's a legend that's being created. That's an inspiration for future generations. That's a reminder of who you are. It's a reminder of who God is, all in that one simple process of telling a story. So tradition is bottom up. T.S. Eliot said this, tradition is not solely or even primarily the maintenance of certain dogmatic beliefs. These beliefs have come to take their living form in the course of the formation of a tradition. What I mean by tradition involves all those habitual actions, habits, and customs, from the most significant religious rite to our conventional way of greeting a stranger, which represent the blood kinship of the same people living in the same place. It involves a good deal which can be called taboo. We become conscious of these items or conscious of their importance usually only after they have begun to fall into desuetude, meaning misuse, or they're going away. As we are aware of the leaves of a tree when the autumn wind begins to blow them off. So what is he saying? You know how to greet a stranger. You know how to interact in the market. You know how to worship God. You know all of these things because they've been given to you. There's a richness in that. And you don't even notice they're there, just like English. You don't even notice you're speaking English. You just speak it. And when those things start going away, that's when you start realizing that they were there in the first place, right? And I think that's what our society's feeling. I think that is why a lot of young men, and I have talked to them sometimes for hours, are converting to Eastern Orthodoxy and to Roman Catholicism and to Presbyterian. No, I mean, we'll leave it at those two. What are they looking for in that? Why are they converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? I talked to, I remember, a young man for like an hour about this. And it was at a conference on the Constitution and the original intent. And I'm like, look, us Protestants are about original intent of the Bible. That's what it is, right? These judges come in and they say it's tradition, but they get off track, and we're trying to go back to the original tradition. And he couldn't. He said, I don't know how you interpret the Bible if you don't have a tradition to appeal to. I'm like, we do. It's just, but I think what's going on is evangelical Christianity has reinvented itself every 10 years to follow ideological trends. And so they don't come in and sense the trappings of a tradition. There's nothing older than 10 years in some of their buildings. They don't even know who set up the church. You go into these old churches. You ever gone to like an old Anglican church and there's like a shrine for Pastor so-and-so from 1752, and you're like, wow, they still have that here. That's not, most evangelical churches have no sense of where they came from, where they're going. They just kind of exist. And I can understand why some people are attracted to something that seems more rooted. So the third thing, and this is the final sort of difference between tradition and ideology, is fixed and universal. Tradition is developed in particular. So Matthew 19, 7 through 9, it says this. They said to him, why then did Moses command to give them her a certificate of divorce and send her away? He said to them, because of the hardness of your heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not this way. Now, what is that? What's going on there? Why did Moses permit a certain state of affairs it wasn't supposed to be that way from the beginning? Well, because there was a particular situation that Moses was speaking into. Situations actually do change. The character of a people changes. That's why our system is built for people who can govern themselves, who are moral and righteous. When you don't have moral and righteous people, our system starts breaking down. It's suited for one particular kind of situation, right? Tradition sort of like water flows around these things. Tradition comes up with answers within the tradition for the problems that start coming up. So if there's a problem, as Moses had, with a divorce, Moses has exceptions in the law for a particular situation in the civil law. How about this one? You shall not muzzle an ox while he is threshing. The laborer is worthy of his wages. Paul says this in 1 Timothy. He basically says you pay your pastor And he brings up this case law from the Old Testament. He's appealing to a tradition before him that had a principle behind it to then make a different kind of application in a different situation. So this is how tradition has typically worked. As situation changes, as technology develops, traditions will develop with it. You see this even musically, as we have new technologies in music. Music can develop. Now, and Tim's going to talk, I think, more about that a little bit tomorrow. But Jesus critiques bad tradition from inside the tradition itself, too. I think it's good to note that. So he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint, dill, and cumin, have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And he also says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So what is he doing when he does these kinds of things? He's saying, hey guys, you think that you're following these traditions and that makes you holier. You're not even following the tradition appropriately. You got off track. I'm going to bring you back to, from within the tradition you say you're following, the truth. So tradition has these sort of the mechanisms within it to even correct itself. And that's what the Reformation was, in my opinion. So, and this is I said the last, adaptability was the last thing. This is actually the last thing. So I think that in ideology, there's a different final product that's produced when you imbibe ideology. You develop a love for party and proposition. It's artificial. Remember the Communist Party in Russia? Whatever the party said went. I don't care if your family was against it, you turn them in. The party. Same thing in Nazi Germany, same thing in any totalitarian system. It's the party. And why the party? Because the party is the prophet from God, essentially, that is the carrier of the ideology that you believe. That's not a natural relationship. That's not the world God made. That's an artificial creation that now subsumes the natural world. Now, in tradition, you have a love for God and neighbor that forms within it. That's at least what the mechanism is intended to produce. Exodus 12:14, now this day, the Passover, will be a memorial to you. You shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. So this is something that binds the country together, a shared love of what God did for our ancestors, because it was going to be for people who didn't experience the Passover. What God did means something for us today. You've connected to your ancestors, right? How often is Israel commanded to love their neighbor? You know, why are the dietary laws, the priestly clothing, the celebrations so distinct from other nations? Richard Weaver had this awakening in World War II. He talked, and I'm going to quote this and I'll explain it, but he says this, and it is about World War II and the lack of chivalry that he saw in the war. The profoundly interesting feature of chivalry, he says, was that it offered a plan whereby civilization might contain a war and go on existing as civilization. It tried to treat war or human combat as one of the activities of civilization, a dangerous one to be sure, but one that could be kept under control. It insisted that even in war, when maximum strain is placed upon the passions, man may not become an absolute killer. I was telling Tim Bushong a story on the way up of a few months ago. I had an interaction which shook me up a little. I'm not going to lie. I've been seeing a lot of really crazy things on social media. And I'm wondering, I'm like, is this social media? Where is this coming from? Well, I was private messaging with a guy who was saying that it was justified, and I kid you not, to mow down children in the woods during the Holocaust. Because, well, look, the God said to eliminate the Canaanites. So it's the same kind of thing, right? He's justifying the Holocaust. And this is someone in Reformed evangelical circles that's telling me this. And I'm like, I can't believe what I'm hearing, right? What is that? Where's that coming from? Well, Richard Weaver in World War II was on the Ally side. He was critical of Germany, critical of Japan, but he noticed something. He noticed the rules of war just seemed to be changing. And whether it was liberalism or communism or fascism, whatever it was, those became the driving forces. And you could just eliminate populations. And he was very critical, and I'm not going to have this discussion now, but he's very critical of dropping atomic bombs on civilian populations. So we never did this before. This was always looked down upon. This was not something we were supposed to do. But because it's in the name of some great ideological crusade, we'll do it. That's at least how he interpreted it. And it was one of the things that he said, this is why we need tradition. It gives us some boundaries. Ideology just lets you go anywhere you please for the protection or the defense or the forwarding of the ideology. So here's the summary. Here's the summary of everything here. Tradition should reinforce divine order and wisdom from the past. It should form organically, it should adapt to situations, and it should produce shared loves for God and neighbor. And the identity crisis I think we're having as a country is a form of amnesia. We're forgetting who we are. We don't know anymore. We don't know in religion, we don't know in politics, we don't know in anything who we used to be, and we feel kind of unstable. That's what's happening broadly speaking in the world right now. Traditional Christians, though, can offer, I think, a sense of people and a place and a past. And this is something the world is craving very much so, even if they don't know they're craving it. They're going to all the wrong answers, right? 2020, we found out there's evil in the world. Where is the evil? How do you get rid of the evil? Jesus said evil comes from within. That's where the evil is. Guess what? It starts with you. It's the gospel message, right? The church, I think, can play a central role. We have a tremendous opportunity, but the question is, are we going to step into it? Are we going to realize that's what's happening around us? Or are we going to adopt a new gimmick or attach ourselves to the new wave or the new ideology or the new thing that the Zoomers want to do? The Zoomer men want to do this, so we got to do this, right? We will need to be unashamed of who we are, our stories, our songs, our symbols, and our celebrations. That's what's key. We can't be ashamed of those things going forward. As Americans, as Christians, that's the path out of here. That's the path out of the dilemma we're in. The church, I think, can be a shelter from the cold, unforgiving staleness of ideology. It can be a place where mystery can be embraced and a connection with the saints past and future is forged. It's a lasting institution. It's not based upon political will, but love for God and neighbor. And that's what you find at the end of tradition is love. You pass down things, you form a connection because you love the person and you love God. That's what's at the base of tradition. So why should we sing old hymns? Because it's tradition. And that's a good answer.